What is up, gang, and welcome to another episode of Inspired By, a series where we look at the musical trends past and present to understand the techniques used so that you guys can make better music. My name's Will and I make a plethora of music under the moniker Hush Child. We're back today with another episode and another silly hat because I'm still in lockdown here in the UK and no barbershops are open. I've been shaving my head for a while and clearly it's not going that well. I get a lot of people ask me how we make these things knock and stop being in competition with one another. And I've got a few fundamental things that you guys should definitely try. We're aiming for a mix that isn't muddy and that is filled by the sound spectrum. So we're going to look at 5 main points, but we're also going to look at a couple more advanced techniques as well. So make sure you stick around right till the end. The main takeaway for this should be that you guys should be able to get that bass and that kick drum level right, and both should be audible within headphones and really any other speakers. As always, if this isn't your first time here and you want to find your way back for any reason, please do consider hitting that subscribe button, hit that bell icon to get notified when any future video goes out. We're almost at 2,000 subscribers in such a short amount of time. Give it a like if you've learned something new, and if you want to drop any feedback or give me some ideas for future videos, do leave a comment in the dungeon below. Let's jump into the video. So I've quickly knocked up an example of a track that I used to hear a lot when I was in teaching, and still a track that I hear quite a lot when people share tracks for feedback with me. If you do want to share any of your music, feel free to join our Discord. The link is in the description below. Obviously, if you join the Discord, there's more tips on production. You get to speak to the community and get advice on your tracks as well. As I mentioned, here's what I hear a lot in early production ideas. So super simple idea with like 6 elements. We've got the kick there, the snare, the hats, and the open hats. They sound like this. We've got this chord layer. And the bass. And you may or may not be able to hear that just yet. So if you don't have some headphones on, I'd advise throwing them on now, but it's all good. By the end of this video, you will be able to hear that bass. So it really comes down to some key fundamentals. The biggest thing for you guys when you're mixing your track is going to be firstly levels and panning. This is going to be super important because if you've got a nice mix of things, it's going to make your job all the more easy. When we first get into production, of course, you're just dragging sounds in and trying to create a collage of ideas and eventually a piece of music. But all of those sounds are fighting for the same space. So what you want to do is carefully look at the levels and say, right, which is the most important for me and for the listener, and what do I want to be the loudest in the mix? So if we have a look at this, okay, so I can see that my kick is on -12 dB. I'm going to bring my snare down a little bit. Hi-hats, where are they sitting? How do they sound? They're not too bad. I'm going to bring them down for this example. Now these chords are actually super, super loud. And I want them to be kind of under everything else that's going on. And my bass is hitting at -6.89, which is not too bad. And we're actually going to leave it there for now, I think, because once we add some processing to that, it's going to be a lot louder anyway. So we might still have to bring it down. Now, the second thing is going to be panning. You can see that I've already panned the open hi-hat. There's not too much that I might want to pan here apart from these chords, but we'll come back to that. A lot of the time we have all of our tracks starting in mono. They're completely central, and of course all of these sounds are fighting for the same position. So the more instruments that you can pan, the better, because the listener is going to be able to separate their attention to the different instruments that are going on. Unfortunately, with a track like this or something that's made for the club, a lot of your elements are going to be completely central, like the kick and the bass drum. They're going to be in mono and they're going to be fighting for a similar position. So what can we do? Well, these chords, we can make them a little bit wider. I'm just going to use the Haas plugin from Kilohertz, but as I've said before, and as I said in my last video, you can use sample delay to create this effect. This is going to make them sound a lot wider. And that just takes some of the attention away from the central space of music. Something that I would suggest doing is adding spectrum to your master track in Ableton. If you give that a double click, you'll just see where the frequencies are in your track. And that'll give you a better idea of where the free space is. What we want to do as producers is fill up the musical spectrum with sound. So if you've got any free space, try and send an instrument to that place or create some harmonic layers, as I'm going to show you, to make that sound thicker and sound wider. Cool, so not too bad, but the thing that I notice immediately is that we've got a huge section filling up this bass region from the kick, from the bass, and possibly from the chords, and we're gradually sloping down around here. Now that's fine, we don't want to flatline everything at the absolute maximum peaks, but we do want to fill up this sort of 1 to 10k region at least anyway. Now, if we're looking at kick versus bass drum frequency, I'm going to put these side by side. The first thing that I would look at is EQ, and I would add an EQ to each of these things. I'm going to immediately add a high pass filter to roll off some of the lows, and I don't need any of those sub frequencies in my kick drum. If we have a look at how that looks, you can see that this is quickly filling up this area here. So I'm probably going to want to take out some of those lows, maybe to like the 90 hertz position. Then with my bass, we're going to see how that looks. We're going to add another EQ8, and you can see that from this fundamental frequency here, we're starting at that 90 hertz region. So let's try and roll off some of that. Okay, so we're losing some of the harmonic layering, but that's not the end of the world. Let's put that back together with our kick drum. Cool. We can increase kind of the attack of that kick drum a little bit by picking up some of the areas down here, just by like a dB or two. See how that my bass is already sitting a little bit higher? Well, again, that's going to change when we add perhaps a little bit of saturation. So we're going to add a saturator here, and we're going to start to turn the drive up, maybe mess with the soft clip and the bass, similar to how we did in our previous video. So if we switch the position of the saturator and start to bring this bass up, you actually see some of the harmonic lines come out of that EQ. See how we have these peaked elements as well? So before it looked like this. I start to bring them up. We have these new lines here. So that's our harmonic frequencies, and we can use those to kind of fool the listener into hearing the fundamental frequency. And that's what we've spoken about in many other videos, of pulling those frequency out of laptop speakers and phones. So even if you're not wearing headphones, you probably heard that if you hadn't heard the bass already. So we can mess with this a little bit in our track and try and pull it out a little bit. Let's roll this off again to about 350. And start to bring the bass up. Cool, And if that's not enough, we can add an amp as well. And like we did in our last video, we can set this to one of the presets. For this, I'm just going to choose bass, and I'm going to start to adjust the presence. And you can see there that we're starting to clip a little bit. So on this bass layer, seeing as this is our key problem, I'm just going to add a limiter there. And I said that this would be a little bit louder, so we can actually bring this back down now. Now don't forget that with this particular example, I'm using the kicks on a MIDI layer, and this means that you can change those sounds over time. It might be that you've got a sound that is just a little bit too short or in the wrong pitch or frequency to be heard with your bass layer. So what I can do is I can go down into my Soundsmiths pack and I can choose kicks, and through this I can go through my different sounds and just choose something that works a little bit better. So I think that number 7 probably worked the best because it had that breath of distortion or white noise in it. But in terms of what I liked in taste, I'm gonna go with number 4. Something that's going to help a little bit, but it's a little bit more advanced, is something called the Transient Master. Now there's many plugins like it. This one's by Native Instruments, but essentially it has 3 very simple knobs: attack, sustain, and gain. So you can use this to take away some of the harsh transients or add more kind of squareness to the transients. If we take the attack down on our kick drum, this is what it sounds like. It's a lot more soft than it should. At 0%, you can hear the full force of the preset as it was. And if we increase that, it becomes a lot more punchy. Now we can extend this with the sustain option, which is going to keep that peak transient playing for longer as we increase this. Now it's super subtle, but within all the music, this is going to become really beneficial to hear in our kick drum amongst everything else. We can now go back and look at our levels. And I even decrease that a tiny bit. Finally, with our bass region, if our bass is acting up just a little bit too much, we can of course add a sidechain compressor, a fade, or automate that volume as well. It depends how you want to work. There's no problem with just automating the volume if that's a way that you want to work, or if you're working in audio, you can fade the beginning region. So to do this, just hit A and then create a tiny layer in which you want to fade in. So it would sound like this. That's going to give enough free space for the kick drum to have its attack and then the bass to come afterwards. The sidechain doesn't need to be a daunting thing. It's just alleviating some of that automation time for you. So we choose our compressor, we go to sidechain, and then we go audio from, and we choose that kick drum. And it explains to us that there's a signal coming in. And as we bring the threshold down, you're going to be able to hear the bass get sucked out. So if I do it without the kick drum, this is what it will sound like. So without. And as I start to bring that down, and you can see here how much work that sidechain compressor is doing. So I'll bring the attack down to about 20 milliseconds, so it cuts out pretty much immediately as the kick drum comes in. And then I'll mess with the release time and the threshold. Let's put the kick and bass together. Now, one final thing that I want to mention is that if you're adding reverb to an instrument, like I am with the snare, that's being sent to this Valhalla plate reverb here. This can also get muddied in the mix by any of the bass frequency. So sometimes it's important to just add an EQ to your reverb send perhaps, or do it in the reverb itself in our Valhalla plate settings, we have these low frequency options. You can obviously turn that gain down, but if you don't, or you're not sure where to find them, you can always just add an EQ at the end, create a little roll off, and wherever you see that frequency, you can roll that off or extend some of those highs as well. So that'll stop any of those frequencies being muddied by the kick, the bass, and the other things fighting for the same space. Don't forget that we can go over to our chord layer as well, which doesn't yet have an EQ on it, and have a little look at that. And we've got this huge region that we can't necessarily hear, but is it fighting for that space as well. We can extend that 1K to 10K region and accentuate it up here, and maybe take down some of the muddy frequencies around the 500 Hertz region. So that sounds a little bit more delicate than it did before. Without the EQ, it sounded like this. With the EQ, it sounds like this. Again, very subtle, but it's going to help your instruments not fight for the same space. There we have it, guys. At the end of another episode, I hope you've learned just how we can get our kicks and our basses to work in harmony together rather than competing for the same space. If you've learned something or enjoyed this video, please do leave it a like. If you're not subscribed already, consider hitting that subscribe button. Hit the bell icon if you want to find your way back for any reason. And if you want to give me some advice on a future video, something that you'd like to see, then leave a comment in the dungeon below. If you want to see anything that I've mentioned in previous videos, then as always, they're linked in the description below. For right now, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.